I don't know about you, but these days it feels like the world and our lives are moving at hyperspeed. The all-new Nissan Murano is an unapologetic refuge amidst the hustle and bustle. In the Nissan Murano, you can take a beat, catch your breath, and re-energize. With its elevated modern interior and bold new exterior, this vehicle stands out. Its massaging leather-appointed seats melt away the tension of a busy day, adds to that feeling of refuge. Optional features like panoramic moonroof that adds tons of natural light to its roomy cabin, and ambient lighting sets the right vibe. So crucial in dreary winter days. The Bose premium sound system helps you escape further into your favorite music. The Nissan Murano and all its features gives you the greatest rush, while not feeling like you're rushing at all. Find your moment of calm in the all-new Nissan Murano. Drive the all-new 2025 Nissan Murano today. Features listed or available upgrades.
Get ready for the ultimate country music getaway. Country superstar Keith Urban is performing live on the Top Shelf Country Cruise, sailing February 2026 aboard the luxury Celebrity Reflection, with stops in St. Kitts and Nevis and St. Martin. Enjoy 7 days of non-stop entertainment, all brought to you by Signature Cruise Experiences. Don't wait. Guests who join the pre-sale are already booking their staterooms, and you can get in line right behind them. Visit TopShelfCountryCruise.com to join the pre-sale for free. No deposit required.
Donna Hall and Michael Margaret planned a weekend camping trip that they never came home from. They had last been seen at a friend's house, but the police believe they stopped somewhere else before continuing on to the place where their bodies would eventually be found. That in-between place may be the key to cracking this cold case. I'm Charlie, and welcome to Crimelines. Hello and welcome. As you were listening to this episode, I am 2 weeks away from leaving on my trip to South America. And unfortunately, I did not get ahead on podcast things, or at least as ahead on podcast things as I had hoped. So I am going to be altering the release schedule slightly to accommodate both my traveling and my current stress levels, because really, what's the point of going on vacation if you're just stressed about it? So, just because I love to manage expectations, I will let you know that there will not be an episode the first week in March. And for those on Patreon, Supercast, and Apple Podcasts, there will also only be one Beyond the Files episode in March. But to make it up to you, I will do an extra one at some point between April and June when I'm back to my routine. So you won't be missing any content. And those who have been supporters on those platforms for a while can tell you that I have never shorted you on the promised bonus content. Nearly 6 years of Crimelines, and the content goes up without fail. So you can trust me when I say that the episode's going to come out. It just won't be in March. And with those programming notes out of the way, I want to go ahead and get into this episode by first thanking Haley Gray Research for helping with the research on this case, and to give a shout out to my friends over at the Mind Over Murder podcast, who covered this case through multi-part interviews. I'm going to leave a link in the show notes so that you can find them, because I really want you to check the podcast out. One of the hosts, Bill, and I saw each other most recently at the Berkshire Podcast Festival in October, and we tried to take a picture together, but the two of us kept cutting up so much that I don't know that we ever got a normal picture of us just smiling, or if we just have the ones of us laughing at whatever joke the other one's making. It's really incredible that such a serious podcasting genre really attracts people who are anything but serious outside of this work. Bill also has a secondary connection to this case in that this case was looked at in connection with the Colonial Parkway murders, which were serial murders of at least 8 to 10 people in Virginia in a 3-year span, 1986 to 1989. And Bill's sister, Kathy, was one of the victims. She was actually one of the first 2 victims as she was killed alongside her girlfriend, and we will talk a little bit more about this theory when we get to it, though we're not going into the case in depth. And again, if you want to hear more about that case too, Mind Over Murder podcast is the place to go. The case we're talking about tonight is that of Donna Hall and Michael Margaret, and it's one I've wanted to cover for a while, and I'm glad I am continuing the tradition I started in 2024 where I set aside the second Wednesday of every month to do a cold case spotlight episode, and today, this is the case. We are going to start with Donna Hall, who was born in Virginia in January of 1966. She was raised in the Richmond area and was known for being very friendly. One friend told the Richmond Times-Dispatch that Donna was the type of girl in high school that would seek out the people who didn't have very many friends and make sure they felt included. While in high school, Donna started dating Margaret, and he was a couple grades ahead of her, but they hit it off and stayed together through all of Donna's high school years. Mike had been born in May of 1963 in Virginia, and when he was several months old, his parents adopted him, and he grew up with 2 younger siblings. Just as Donna was the friendly, outgoing type, Mike was too. His mother, June, told the Richmond Times-Dispatch that he loved life and really lived it to the fullest. He was always on the go, wanting to be out hunting or fishing or even just driving his Jeep around. Really, anything that got him outdoors was what he wanted to be doing, and he would talk about a dream he had of buying a plot of land and putting a cabin on it. He could live out there with his best friend, his dog named Bear. But Mike, being just out of high school, needed a little more money in his bank account for all of that. So he decided to live at home at least until his Jeep was paid off, which his parents absolutely didn't mind. And I know parents like to joke that they can't wait to get the kids out of the house, but in my lived experience, you realize how fast they grew up when they're 18, 19, or 20. So hanging on to them a little longer seems just fine. In the spring of 1984, Donna graduated high school and found some clerical work for an employee benefit consultant while she lived at home with her parents in Richmond, Virginia. Her boss said she was an all-around sweet, happy person. Mike, who had graduated ahead of her, had trouble finding work in his chosen field, which was graphic arts, right away, so he ended up taking a job as a delivery man for a dry cleaner. In February of 1984, so just a few months before Donna graduated, he got work with Virginia Electric and Power Company, and he was doing maintenance on their fleet vehicles. And this turned out to be a job he really liked. He liked to work with his hands, and his boss said that Mike was the ideal employee. If you had a shop of people like Mike, you were set. So they were both young, outgoing, and hardworking, and another thing Donna and Mike had in common was the love of being outdoors. So the two planned to take a weekend away on Friday, August 17th, 1984, to enjoy some time camping. Mike told his boss at work that they were going camping in the Carolinas, so his boss let him off work a little early, 9 p.m., in order to make the drive. Now, I'll say that Mike and Donna told different people different stories about where they were going camping, and telling his boss they were going to the Carolinas may have been an excuse to get off work a little early to make it sound like they were going further away than they were. Regardless, Mike left work and picked Donna up from her apartment, and then they went to his house to load up the Jeep with their groceries, a thermos full of coffee, a cooler, and some luggage. What they didn't pack was much of what you would expect with usual camping supplies, and it might be that they just didn't have what they needed, because they ended up going to a friend's house after they left Mike's house to go borrow a tent. However, this friend wasn't home when they got there, but there was some sort of party happening. It was more of a hangout than a rager. So Donna and Mike stayed for about 30 minutes chatting with people before they decided to leave, even though the friend had not come back yet. They left around 11:45, saying that they could make do without the tent. So the plan was for them to be gone all weekend and get home Sunday the 19th so that Donna could make it into work on Monday. When they didn't come home or contact their families by Sunday night, people were worried enough to file missing persons reports, but they told themselves it was probably nothing. There was even some speculation that maybe Mike and Donna hadn't left to go camping at all, but rather they ran off and eloped and they'd come home soon enough. Of course, hope waned and concern grew when they didn't come home on Monday or Tuesday either. The families didn't hear anything until the night of Tuesday, August 21st, when a man named Robert was walking his dog in a wooded area, not directly behind Donna's apartment complex, but kind of like across the street from her apartment and then behind that. Robert saw Mike's Jeep parked there, and it wasn't the first time he had seen the vehicle back there. It had been there for a few days, and it didn't seem strange at first since sometimes people did park back there. The area had paths through the fields and the woods that most people would take something like a four-wheeler out on, but a Jeep like Mike's would be able to drive through. But people didn't tend to leave their cars parked back there unmoved for days, so Robert decided this time he was going to take a closer look. The passenger door of the Jeep was open, and Robert could see that there was blood in the vehicle. Not a lot, we're not talking pools of blood, but more like spatter. The Jeep was parked in a way that it backed up to what has been reported as a ravine, but that made me picture something much deeper than was actually there. This is pretty shallow. So Robert went from the back of the Jeep to the other side of the gully and followed a trail that took him back into the woods a bit more. Probably about 10 meters or so behind the Jeep, he saw a blanket. He kept going, and as he got closer to the edge of the woods that backed up to a soybean field, he saw two bodies. They were 18-year-old Donna Hall and 21-year-old Michael Margaret. They were about 20 meters or so from the back of the Jeep. Both of them were found face up, and they were lying heel to heel. Both of them had been stabbed repeatedly, and their throats were slit. This was characterized by the investigators as a rage killing. Some other things worth noting here were that Mike had pretty obvious defensive wounds, whereas Donna did not. Donna was also missing her shoes, and they were not found in the area. As for what else they got from the crime scene, the investigators did get good evidence, but they were frustrated by what they didn't have. Over the weekend that Mike and Donna's bodies were in the woods, it had rained a lot, and it was hot and humid. This obscured some of the potential evidence, things like footprints, drag marks, tire treads. Those were gone. If the killer left a bloody fingerprint on one of the bodies or on the Jeep, it was washed away. The blood evidence around the bodies had also been diluted enough that it was initially hard to determine if Donna and Michael were killed in that spot where they were found or were they killed elsewhere. There was one clue they had that the two had been killed in that location, or at least Donna was, and that's that in Donna's hand, she had clutched some pine needles and debris from the ground around her. Also, because of the heat and humidity, decomp was accelerated more than it would have been otherwise, and that meant that the wounds could not be analyzed to determine if the two were stabbed with the same weapon or different ones, meaning it was unclear if this was one attacker or two. Thankfully, the Jeep had been somewhat protected from the elements. The back canvas had been pinned up and the passenger side door was open, but most of the interior was covered. And that's why Robert saw blood spatter, which the police found even more of as they searched the vehicle. There was some on the rear part of the passenger door, under the driver's seat, and on one of the suitcases in the back. They tested this blood and blood from Donna and Michael's clothing. 1984 is pre-DNA technology, so they did blood type this blood. And in doing this, they actually found 3 different blood types, which confirmed that both the blood from the Jeep and the blood on the clothing came from 3 different people. After confirming Donna and Mike's blood type, the investigators have released the information that the third blood type, presumably the killer's blood, was type A. The search of the Jeep also led the police to question what Donna and Mike might have been doing back in those woods. It was very unlikely they went there to camp because 1, it wasn't a camping area, and 2, they didn't have camping gear with them. The investigators weren't sure if they were really planning on camping that weekend at all, or if that was a story they told people to cover for what their actual plans were. Even the family suspected maybe they snuck off to elope, so it really could have been something like that. They did find in the Jeep a woman's driver's license, which I'm sure seemed like a very promising lead at first, but after investigating it, the detectives concluded that it was very unlikely to be related to the murders. It was much more likely that Donna was an 18-year-old who had a 21-year-old boyfriend in a state where, at the time, the drinking age was 19. It was probably the ID she used to get into bars. On the ground just behind the Jeep was that blanket Robert saw, and one of the officers at the scene said the blanket smelled so badly that, quote, someone's been killed on this blanket, end quote. I mean, I would expect it to smell mildewy or moldy or something, having been out in the rain like that. And that can smell pretty bad, but this must have been beyond even that. And when they picked the blanket up, a pack of cigarettes fell out, and there were cigarette butts in the area. All right, listeners, are you ready to uncover the secret to youthful skin and vibrant health? Just like a gripping true crime story, the mystery of aging has captivated us for centuries. What if I told you that the answer lies in your body's own collagen? But as I have learned firsthand in recent years, as we age, this vital protein diminishes, leaving us with fine lines, wrinkles, and less elasticity. Enter Native Path Collagen, your ally in the quest for a radiant complexion. Their collagen peptides pack a powerful punch, supporting not just your skin and hair, but your joints, bones, and gut health too. Just imagine a smoother, more youthful you, all while getting lost in the world of chilling crime stories. Okay, true crime listeners, ready to crack the code? Head to getnativepath.com/crimelines for a special discount on your first order. Plus, they're offering my listeners bundles that are not available on their website at up to 45% off, plus free shipping. Native Path Collagen, where the truth is just a scoop away. Their single ingredient formula has thousands of 5-star reviews, over 5 million jars sold, and over 1 million happy customers. It's completely unflavored, and it dissolves easily into coffee, smoothies. You can even bake with it. Every order comes with a 365-day money-back guarantee. That link again is getnativepath.com/crimelines for 45% off plus free shipping today, and you can go ahead and click that right in the show notes. Whenever I try to improve my nutrition or eating habits, but I don't have a plan or that plan is way too overwhelming, I know it's going to fail. And that is why I tried Prolon's 5-day program, because it was taking the guesswork out and giving me a science-backed plan that made it easy to stay focused. Prolon's fasting-mimicking diet is a plant-based nutrition system that nourishes the body while making cells believe they're fasting. It all starts with their 5-day program, snacks, soups, and beverages designed to keep your body in a fasting state. Yes, you get to eat while fasting. Prolon was researched and developed for decades at USC's Longevity Institute, and it helps support healthy blood sugar, which is the primary reason I tried it, but it also supports enhanced skin appearance and improved energy and focus post-fast. And you can check out under the Science tab on their website some of the results they've seen in their testing. And one that stood out to me is that 3 consecutive cycles of Prolon, that means monthly, have shown to reduce your biological age score by an average of 2.5 years. So I have to say I was pretty excited to try this, and it had 2 things that guaranteed a follow-through for me. 1, everything came conveniently packaged so I didn't have to do any guesswork, and 2, everything tasted great. I am really glad I did this, and to help you kickstart a health plan that truly works, Prolon is offering Crimelines listeners 15% off site-wide, plus a $40 bonus gift when you subscribe to their 5-day nutrition program. Just visit prolonlife.com/crimelines. That's prolonlife.com/crimelines to claim your 15% discount and your bonus gift. prolon.com/crimelines. 2025 is a low spend year for me. I like my money where I can see it, which means in my wallet. Unfortunately, traditional big wireless carriers prefer to see my money in their wallets. I was fed up with the high bills and the random fees and then perks that turned out to not save me anything, so I have just switched over to Mint Mobile. I have their unlimited plan, so this is the most expensive one, and I'm still saving $300 a year. And that's just my phone. I also have a husband and kids, so let's multiply that savings by 4. You could actually save even more since Mint Mobile premium wireless plans actually start as low as $15 a month, and you're not giving up anything. All of the plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. I have never had any issues with coverage, and you get to bring your phone and phone number over with any Mint Mobile plan and get 3 months of premium wireless service from Mint Mobile for $15 a month. If you like your money, Mint Mobile is for you. Shop plans at mintmobile.com/crimelines. That's mintmobile.com/crimelines. Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month 5GB plan required, equivalent to $15 a month. New customer offer for the first 3 months only, and then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See Mint Mobile for details. Based on finding Mike's Jeep left behind, Donna's jewelry still on her body, and Donna's purse untouched in the front seat, the investigators very quickly ruled out a random robbery as a motive. But they would eventually rule in the idea of a targeted robbery. And this is where the investigation outside of the crime scene really comes into play. After interviewing friends of Donna and Mike's, as well as the people at the friend's house they saw the last time they were seen alive, the police came to believe that this was very likely drug-related and that drugs or money or both were stolen. The early media reporting on drug use in relation to Donna and Mike and their larger friend group, based on what I found at newspapers.com, was all over the place early on. In some articles, the police would refer to drugs like cocaine, but in others, they would just talk about marijuana. I know attitudes around pot vary, and they're definitely more casual now than in the 1980s, so I acknowledge me even just saying just marijuana is a bit of my modern lens here. But I mean, I do see a pretty big difference between pot and cocaine, and thankfully, this is one of the things that was cleared up a bit on the Mind Over Murder podcast interview that was with a detective who worked on the case. He said that there was evidence that Donna and Mike were moving from pot into harder drugs, but they still weren't heavy users. It sounded like they were increasing their buying, mostly because they were starting to sell it on the side. According to the detective, Donna seemed to be the one more interested in doing this, probably because she saw it as an easy way to make money over that entry-level job she had. Neither of them would have been major players on the scene at that point, and to me it kind of sounds like it was that guy who buys weed from a dealer and then resells it to his friends at school. Like, they were at that level of selling drugs. But there is some evidence they may have been making bigger moves, and possibly that brought them into the orbit of more dangerous people. According to what the investigators learned, Mike had about $5,000 in cash on him that night, which would be like $15,000 in today's money. That money was not found on him at the scene, and the police believe the cash was intended to buy drugs to then resell. So either they still had the money when they went into the woods and the money was taken, or they had already made the drug buy and then the drugs were what was stolen. The area where the bodies were found was an area that teens would sometimes go to hang out and maybe drink. But Mike and Donna were a bit past that stage. I know they were still young, but Mike had a vehicle and they had the freedom of movement that meant they didn't have to be sneaking off to the woods behind the apartments. It seemed strange that Mike and Donna would make a big show about leaving town and then just go to the woods behind the apartment to hang out. So the theory is that maybe Donna and Mike did stop back there on their way out of town to meet someone for a drug deal. The blanket and cigarettes, assuming they were theirs, could indicate that they sat around waiting on someone. It's possible that the person or people who found them in the woods that night weren't the dealers or the buyers they were expecting to meet. Maybe it was just someone who had overheard talk about how much money Donna and Mike had on them and had followed them back there. I mean, the investigators heard about this large amount of money, so maybe someone else did, and they thought this would be an easy target. They could steal this money, and who are Donna and Mike going to report it to? You don't exactly go to the police because someone stole your drug money. But then things escalated when Mike started to fight back. There is something that showed up on the talk screen at autopsy that I think is relevant here. Both Donna and Mike had Demerol, an opioid, in their systems. The amount in Mike's body was characterized as large, and the amount in Donna's system was extreme. According to people they talked to, the investigators learned that it really wasn't that hard to get some Demerol around town. But just because the Demerol was in their systems doesn't mean they knowingly took it. It's possible that they did take it on purpose, and the killer took advantage of the fact that they would be easier to overpower. But it's also possible that they didn't know they were taking it, and their attacker slipped it to them to make them easier to overpower. So then you have to wonder, when and where did Mike and Donna ingest the Demerol? And the police believe that they may have gone somewhere after the friend's house, but before they got to the woods. They've put out calls to the public for information on where that location may have been, and to this day are still seeking tips about that. The Henrico County investigators said in a short documentary that they put out in 2018 that they were given some false information early on that had them going off in various directions that were all dead ends. It has been said that the people at the friend's house who last saw Mike and Donna were very cooperative, so the false leads must have come from other sources. This case follows the pattern of a lot of cold cases where a person of interest would be identified, they would be interviewed, and they would either be ruled out or there would just not be enough evidence to do anything with it. Nearly 200 people were talked to in the early months, and something that the investigators mentioned in November of 1984, 3 months after the murders, was that they had not ruled out the possibility that this was the work of a serial killer, someone who had killed them and moved on. And this surprised me because in my experience in researching cases like this, and also my personal experience with modern police media, I feel like investigators hesitate to use the words serial killer. We had it happen pretty recently here in Kansas City. From August 2016 until May of 2017, 4 men were killed on or near the Indian Creek Trail in South Kansas City. There were so many similarities between the cases, I can't even get into all of them now. But even with all of that, the police were still hesitant to call this the work of a serial killer. And when they made an arrest based on DNA and CCTV, they charged one man, Frederick Scott, with not just those 4 murders, but with 2 other killings. So in this case with Donna Hall and Michael Margaret, I was surprised to hear that the police were acknowledging this as a possibility, particularly since they didn't immediately have other cases to connect it to. Over the first year of the investigation, the tips slowed down, though there would be periods where there would be upticks in information coming in. And these leads were all over the place sometimes, with people saying that the 2 were actually in debt to bad people and they were trying to flee town, or that they were making moves to follow the Grateful Dead around and sell drugs on the tour stops, and even one saying that they were actually in the process of breaking up and that they were in some love triangle and the third party was responsible. None of these leads panned out. And neither did a tip reported by WTVR News. This tip was about how Mike and Donna's bodies were left, which looked possibly posed, and the information was that this was a, quote, motorcycle calling card. The police discounted this, though I'm not 100% sure what it even means. Did they mean a motorcycle gang calling card, like this was their MO? I think that would be the most likely meaning, so I thought, where would this kind of tip even come from? So I did a search of a combination of various words, and found that in 1981, there was a motorcycle gang mass murder in Richmond where 6 people were shot to death in a house. The murders were eventually tied to the Hells Angels and drug dealing in the Richmond area. But I had to wonder if 3.5 years later, would people really connect that case to Mike and Donna's murders? I would think not, except there had been news coverage of the case just 2 months before Mike and Donna's murders with an article that released more information and more details than I saw in any earlier articles. I did not see any article at newspapers.com that described the exact positioning of the 6 bodies. I mean, it's possible one did, but it's not been scanned in yet, so I didn't see it. But I did see an article saying that all 6 were found in non-defensive positions. Maybe with the rumor about drug connections with Mike and Donna and them being also found in a quote-unquote non-defensive position, just lying on their backs, people put some things together and wondered if they were connected. I mean, maybe that's where this comes from. And you know what's funny? The police probably do know what was meant by this motorcycle calling card tip and just chose not to elaborate about it. But then they just had to listen to me try to sleuth it together and likely get it wrong. I mean, if I was a police officer listening to podcasts on cases I investigated, I would probably roll my eyes frequently. But anyway, this isn't something that's uncommon in cold cases because while the case is sitting there and people are talking about it, they're starting to connect things. Maybe things they're making false connections with, but other things they're making in connection to new information that they didn't have in 1984. And one of those theories is one I mentioned earlier on in this episode, and that is that Mike and Donna's murders were connected to the Colonial Parkway killer. The number of victims of this killer or killers is debated. Some sources say 8 or 9, but Wikipedia has 10 listed. The reason Donna and Mike's murders were not suspected to be part of the Colonial Parkway killings earlier is that those didn't start until after this. So if they are connected, these would be the first 2 victims. But the first 2 known victims in the Colonial Parkway murders are Kathy Thomas and Rebecca Dowski from October of 1986. Kathy is the sister of Bill Thomas, the host of the Mind Over Murder podcast. In September of 1987, April of 1988, and September of 1989, 3 more couples were killed in the area of the Colonial Parkway, which connects Jamestown, Williamsburg, and Yorktown. It's about 45 minutes from Richmond, where Donna Hall and Michael Margaret were killed. Just over a year ago, in January of 2024, it was announced that there was DNA from the 1987 double murder and a separate single murder that matched a man named Alan W. Wilmer Sr., who had died in 2017. They were and are doing additional testing with the other murders to see if he is the answer to all of them or just some of them. And we can hope that they will broaden that out to Donna and Mike's case, because they do have DNA. Some of the blood evidence had been destroyed in the process of testing it for blood type, but in 2006, they tried to get the blood evidence tested for DNA. However, there was just not the technology needed to test the samples they had. In 2014, a detective who had been a classmate of Mike's was moved to the cold case team, and this detective, Holsinger, reinvestigated the case and pushed to get the DNA from the clothes tested using our more advanced methods. He also re-interviewed witnesses and said that some were more forthcoming 30 years on than they were back in 1984, particularly the ones who had kind of moved on from that partying lifestyle. But that doesn't mean that everyone was being completely honest and said everything they knew. And another complication was that some rumors in the 30 years since the murders had kind of solidified as facts in people's minds, and they still believed them. In that short documentary that Henrico County put out in 2018 on this case, which is linked in my sources, the investigators pointed out that DNA is probably how this case would be solved. They said the evidence was at the lab, and apparently there was some debate over the years happening behind the scenes about whether the state lab was going to test it or were they going to contract with a private lab. And this took up some time before it was decided to finally send it off to a private lab. And in 2022, they got the DNA results back, and they have been using that to generate leads. A DNA profile only works if you have someone to test it against, so the police are still seeking those leads. A few specific things they are looking at in the event you did live in the Richmond area in 1984 or you know someone who did. The investigators want to know who in the area was dealing with the street sale of Demerol or even using it. They're also looking into people who had access to it at a pharmacy that they may have been stealing it from, or maybe there's someone who broke into a pharmacy, maybe even someone with a prescription pad. They want those tips. The statute of limitations for pretty much everything except the homicides has run out, and the investigators literally do not care about your Demerol use or theft from 1984 in the sense of charging you for it. What they do care about is solving these murders, and that info you have may be a huge help. The police also want to know if someone was walking around in August, September, or October with a laceration to their hand, or maybe some type of injury to their face. It would be easy to assume that the killer bled because they cut themselves with the knife, but the evidence showed that Mike fought back hard, so the blood could have also come from a busted lip or from the killer's nose. Did you see someone with a cut to a finger and a fat lip in August or September of 1984? Numbers to call and tips are always in the show notes, and there is also a Justice for Donna Hall and Mike Margaret Facebook group that I will leave in the show notes so that you can stay updated on this case. The group has been credited with generating tips in the 10 years it's been around, and it is run by one of Donna's friends. As for the families of the victims, Donna's parents, with their only child having been murdered, left the Richmond area. I'm not sure what happened to Donna's father, but her mother died in 2007. Mike's parents stayed in the area, and they called the police once a month for updates for years and years and years, long after the police had anything new to tell them. In 1993, Mike's mom, June, died from a long illness, the root of which the doctors could not quite figure out, and his father, Harry, said it was grief. Around the time of June's death, Mike's birth mother started looking for him. She eventually learned that he was Michael Margaret and that he had been brutally murdered nearly a decade earlier. She was able to meet with Harry, though, and see photos of Mike over the years and heard all about his childhood, and I thought that was just very sweet and hopefully healing in some small way for both of them. Harry Margaret, too, has since passed just 2 months before Donna's mother did. So anyone with information on the murders of Donna Hall and Michael Margaret can call Cold Case Investigators at 804-501-5000 or Crime Stoppers at 804-780-1000. These numbers and links to more information on the case will be in the show notes.